So as you read earlier, you're going to look at a couple different objectives for this project. Multiple ideas for an illustration that includes a silhouetted figure. It's kind of a funny word, but the word is silhouetted. And investigate Adobe Illustrator for creating original vector artwork, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So a silhouette is basically when you take an object or a scene or a person and you essentially make it into a shape. So here you mostly see the outline of this particular building. On these camels here and the person walking, these camels are silhouetted. We looked at that a little bit with the Secret Worlds project when images were backlit. In photography, that's generally how you're going to create a silhouette, is by backlighting. Check out this really nice one. You have the silhouette of the person in the canoe fishing, and then you have kind of this fog that creates an interesting shallow depth of field and an effect on the lake in front of the trees. So Adobe Illustrator is what we'll be using for this project, and really the key difference between Illustrator and Photoshop is that Illustrator is what's called vector based. It does not rely on pixels like Photoshop does, which is raster based. So Photoshop, which is raster based, uses pixels to create the image. You can zoom in and you'll eventually get to a level where you see all of these little dots of color. If you try to enlarge this, it's going to significantly lose quality. So Illustrator is vector based. So the image relies on anchor points planted on a grid, and because it's mathematically based, you can enlarge it as much as you want and you'll never lose quality. So here you can see a small letter enlarged. Here it's nice and sharp still. Here it starts to get blurry or pixely. So I'd like to jump right into showing you some examples of what this project could look like and the direction we're going to take. Now, we haven't actually done this with digital art and photography yet. We've done different variations of projects with Illustrator. The project examples you're actually going to see are from the previous design class. And these students who did these projects didn't have as much time and opportunity to work on their computers as you will. We went to the computer lab. And so these are some of the strong examples that were completed, but I anticipate yours will turn out really strong as well. So here's a few where you see the silhouette of a gymnast, and we added these textures. Here's kind of a action scene, and they create these settings that the figure is in. Some are more simple, some are more complex, and the textures kind of start to bring the images to life a little bit. Here's another one where you have this guy who's kind of a miner walking into a mine shaft, and then you have a skateboarder busting a move here in front of a skyline. I really enjoy this one. Wish the door was a little bit bigger, but you have a guy kind of lowering down to steal this diamond from the museum with all of these rays in between. Notice in each of these there's really interesting composition still, right? So if we go back to this one, you have almost symmetrical, and it's really interesting because of that, and yet her face and arms, this focal point kind of becomes the lower portion of the rule of thirds. Nice rule of thirds over here. Rule of thirds, symmetrical but still a little bit above center. And it's not exactly the same on both sides, so it adds a little bit of interest there. Here's the example that I did for this project when we originally launched it, and you can see I've got the silhouette of the pirate here. I posed for this myself and added in the sword, the hat, and kind of illustrated this scene here. So the question is, how do we go about starting on this project? You'll have time to work in groups within the class to go in front of the green screen and take photographs in poses, basically, that you'll be able to recreate in Illustrator as silhouettes. Now, if you have gear that you want to bring in, you can do that, but probably more likely many of you will be kind of adding those things in. Now if you have like a heavy coat, that might be a prop that you would want to bring in so you can get a more accurate, instead of trying to create this fluffy coat or hat or goggles on the person. The snowboard you could probably add in. One of the ways that you're going to do this as well is thinking about a foreground, middle ground, and background. So what do I mean by that? When I talk about a foreground, I'm basically talking about the part of the scene closest to you and in front of the viewer. So in this silhouette of the trees here, these trees are in the foreground. Then you have the middle ground, the area between the foreground and background. These objects tend to look smaller and are usually somewhat hidden by the images in the foreground, or the objects in the foreground. And then of course you have the background, so whether that's sky, the sun in the background, whatever it might be. Here's a nice example of the foreground, kind of an Indiana Jones type of scene here. All of these darkest ones are in the foreground. You have these layers of texture in the middle ground, and then you have this really kind of haze, a little bit of fog of tree and whatnot in the background. Look at these details that really kind of bring it to life, though. Here's some examples that are by a professional artist. These images were found online and from Star Wars. I would like for you to come up with your own original ideas, right? So not just using a scene from a movie or something. If you have an idea that you're not sure about whether it would be appropriate or not, ask your teacher, and then we can have a conversation about if that would be a possibility or not. Here's another really nice example. These textures that are in the front really kind of give it some life, the little bit of glow that exists, and really the shallow depth of field that's in there. Here again you have your foreground characters, your ones kind of in the middle ground, and this little horizon, and then the background. Okay, so again, composition is key in all of these. These are on that kind of lower line of the rule of thirds, upper line, but central. And then kind of actually in the middle ground, and then your lightning and sky in the background. So we'll be taking some pictures of textures and things that you might be able to use to create some atmosphere. Your challenge for this project, you're going to create a digital scene on Illustrator that uses silhouettes placed in a setting. You should have a background, middle ground, and foreground, and you'll need to really think through your composition to make this work well. So starting out, SI1, so Silhouette Illustration 1, you're going to do a brainstorming worksheet on a physical piece of paper. You're going to list some ideas, and you're not necessarily locking into anything yet, but you're going to list some ideas and possible themes that you might consider for your project. You'll actually start creating some sketches, and I'm not looking for masterpieces, but what might your silhouette look like or be posed into a position, of a particular position, maybe even multiple positions. And then create what's called a thumbnail sketch of what your composition may look like. Now again, this thumbnail sketch does not have to be a masterpiece. It just needs to show some thought into where some key features may end up going. And I'll show you, here's what I did for my pirate one. I have this kind of just little stick figure guy, and I always say stick figures are underrated. If you add little joints and things like this, it kind of gives a sense of the pose, then by all means that is adequate. And then my thumbnail sketch, I kind of did some rough shadows and where the lights and darks would be. You can see it changed, but it gave me a sense of, okay, this guy, he's going to be kind of in the rule of thirds at some level, and then I'm going to have these octopus tentacles kind of wrapping around the ship. So again, just start to put some ideas down. Think of hobbies, think of interests that you have. Even if it seems like it might be something that's difficult, don't steer away from it. Sometimes those ones, when you really push yourself, and if you're excited about it, interested in it, turn out the best. Also think about what might make for an interesting pose or story. Think about a scene maybe from a book or a movie that might provide some inspiration. Hope this helps and you've got a pretty good idea of the direction we're going. And at this point, you can go ahead and get the worksheet and get started on the brainstorming.